All Sunni scholars believe that the fact that the ijtihad was allowed to stand means Allah approved it. So it is direct approval. The only time that wahi will come down is to correct it, which means if it's not corrected, it is correct. Right? So this is very explicit that every ijtihad of the Prophet is binding. The Quran is very clear in the Quran. وَإِن تُطِيعُوهُ تَهْتَدُوا. Only by obeying Him shall you be guided. Right? وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا لِيُطَاعَ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. Every prophet we have sent so that he be obeyed by the permission and command of Allah. Know by your Lord they will not believe until they take you as the final judge in all of their affairs. And they submit to everything you say, and they don't find anything in their hearts problematic to submitting to you. Right? So any person who says, I don't follow the Prophet ﷺ, by unanimous consensus, he's not a Muslim. He's literally a kafir. So, your question of, are there people who are trying to distinguish? Yes, they are. These are the progressives. These are not traditional Sunni Muslims or Shi'i Muslims or any Muslims of the traditional mindset. These are those who say, you know what, let's have a secular Islam. Let's have Islam that, tells me how to pray 5 times a day, but not how to do business transactions. They are the ones extrapolating this point. And it is because of this that somebody might feel we should cut the door at its roots, but that's not the proper way to fight, deviation with another deviation. We believe that the Prophet was a mujtahid, that Allah allowed him to do ijtihad, and that his ijtihad is binding. That's very clear. Now, these groups are basically saying, because he made ijtihad, why should we follow it? That's what they're trying to say. Right? And in response to them, we say we follow it because there are over 60 verses in the Quran that command us to follow the Prophet ﷺ. That's why. Allah Azza wa Jal gave him the authority to have such opinions, and if Allah Azza wa Jal did not want to agree with that position, He then revealed wahi to change it. So, Allah gave him the authority to legislate Sharia upon us. And that authority is binding by Allah's command. وَإِن تُطِيعُوهُ تَهْتَدُوا. If you obey Him, you will be guided. Right? Examples of this, he changed his mind. Apparently sometimes not because Allah told him to, but he felt it was okay. And the fact that Allah Azza wa Jal allowed him to do this clearly says and tells us that Ar-Rasul Musharri', the Prophet ﷺ is somebody whom Allah has allowed to propagate Sharia. A classic example of this is the issue of men visiting graves. The Prophet ﷺ prohibited men from visiting graves. And then he wanted to visit his mother's grave. And so he asked Allah permission. So he initially thought that we should not go to graveyards. This is his own position, and he knows it's his position, and he makes it binding on the ummah. And the ummah follows him. So the only time you enter a graveyard is to bury somebody. You go bury somebody, you get out. That's it. So graveyards are abandoned then. Then he wanted to visit Amina. And so he asked Allah permission to visit Amina. And Allah gave him permission to visit Amina. And that's the famous hadith. He went and he cried. And then he said that كنت نهيتكم عن زيارة القبور. كنت نهيتكم عن زيارة. I used to forbid you from visiting graves, but I wanted to visit my mother Amina's grave, and Allah had allowed me to visit graves. And then he himself was crying so much. So then he said, so go and visit graves because it reminds you of death. So it's as if he himself saw a wisdom in visiting graves. Reminds you of death. And he said, go ahead and visit graves. Right? The key point here is that nobody should say that, well, then this means we don't know what is from Allah, what is from the Prophet ﷺ, because in the end of the day, we don't care. Allah has commanded us to follow the Prophet ﷺ. So if Allah Azza wa Jal did not agree with a decision, He would reveal wahi for it. As we know in the case of the prisoners of Badr, for example. Right? If Allah Azza wa Jal did not agree with something, He would then reveal something for it. So the fact that Allah does not reveal anything means that whatever the Prophet ﷺ said
that's a different story.
Is binding.
This is fiqh al-awla.
No, but the point is still there. that if Allah Azza wa Jal did not agree with any decision, He would reveal wahi. I agree with you, there's no two situations that are exactly the same. But the point being, if the Prophet ﷺ made ijtihad about anything, and Allah Azza wa Jal did not agree with it for whatever reason, He would intervene and send wahi down. That's what I'm saying. And so, when it comes to the sharia, everything the Prophet ﷺ says and tells us to do is sharia. And we don't care whether Allah specifically told him this ruling or not, because Allah chose him to be our Rasul. And Allah chose him to be our role model. And so everything he does and says becomes binding upon us. That's what the purpose of Rasulullah is. That's what Allah, that is what a messenger is. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا لِيُطَاعَ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. Every messenger has been sent so that he is obeyed by his people. Undisputed obedience, right? Yeah, that's the point. وَإِن تُطِيعُوهُ تَهْتَدُوا. Only by giving ita'ah to him will you be rightly guided. Okay? That فَلَا وَرَبِّكَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. No, by your Lord, Allah made qasam by the Rabb of Muhammad. Notice, He didn't have to say وَرَبِّكَ. He could have said فَلَا وَاللَّهِ. فَلَا وَرَبِّكَ. Gave qasam by the Rabb of Muhammad to show that relationship, right? لا يؤمنون. They don't have iman. حتى يحكموك فيما شجر بينهم. Until they take you as their hakam. What does hakam mean? Ultimate judge, right? About any dispute that they have. حتى يحكموك فيما شجر بينهم. ثم لا يجد في أنفسهم حرجا مما قضيت. And then they don't have something in their hearts against what you have said. ويسلموا تسليما. And they submit wholeheartedly. You can't even in your heart feel, why did the Prophet do that? Think about that.
That goes
right?
against the ijtihad idea, because the ijtihad idea has a possibility that he might be wrong. Like
you didn't hear me clearly. If his ijtihad was not agreed by Allah, what did Allah do? He revealed something.
It's already been said. I mean, he's
And so, yeah, but in his own lifetime it's going to come down. That's why the Sharia did go through some fine tuning. In his own lifetime it's going to come down. And there are many instances of commands being back and forth. Again, I don't want to go into dispute here, but according to one opinion, mut'a was forbidden twice and allowed twice. Back and forth and back and forth, right? Another opinion says that lahm donkeys, al-bighal, that was also forbidden twice and allowed twice. That there is some fine tuning going on. And there are other opinions as well. Sometimes somebody suggested something to the Prophet and Allah Azza wa Jalla revealed something because of that suggestion. Now it's coming from Allah Azza wa Jalla, but the suggestion came from another companion. I mean, classic example is hijab. Umar was the one who said, Ya Rasulullah, shouldn't your wives and women be wearing the hijab? And Allah Azza wa Jalla then revealed, and so Umar used to be proud and say, وَافَقْتُ رَبِّي فِي ثَلَاث, right? That I agree with my Lord in three things. So you're opening up a door which could be very complicated, but there's no need to. I understand it, it's very easy. The bottom line is, whatever the Prophet ﷺ says is Sharia, as long as there's nothing that he himself does that goes against that. That's the bottom line. And this is, all of the fuqaha basically say this. All of the fuqaha. So the issue is more theoretical. Can the Prophet have independent ijtihad? It's theoretical. Even if he did, you have to follow it. And he did. The strongest position is he did.
he has ijtihad.
He has ijtihad. Yes, but you are obliged to follow it.